So today's lesson, today's lesson is about static methods. All right, so let's just give a quick example before we explain how all of this works. So a static method is just a type of method that only runs but doesn't return. All right, and these methods are usually used for doing things such as printing things or computing things, but it's not going to take in anything from the user or from the program and manipulate that kind of data. It's just going to do something, nothing else. And that's about it. Also, method and function are two very they both usually refer to the same thing. So method and function are like interchangeable, right? You could say method or you could say function, and people will know that it's referring to the same thing. All right. So here's some notes. Static methods are outside of the main method, but inside of the public class. It doesn't have to be a public class, just a class in general. And the static methods are methods that you create. And then every time you call the function or method in the main method, the code inside of them runs, right? And you can have as many static methods as you want. All right, so a few more notes. So the purpose or the general idea of creating methods or functions is that you can store the code that you want to execute multiple times in the main method in a reusable container. And then you can use this code as much as you want without taking up too much space. And then the naming conventions for method is that the first letter of the name is going to be lowercase, and the first letter of every word after the first word is going to be capitalized. So let's say I wanted my function to be example test. So I'm going to write the word example. The E is going to be lowercase, but then I'm going to write test, and the T is going to be uppercase. Hopefully that makes sense, I guess. And here's an example. All right, so this right here, highlight right here is the static method that we were talking about earlier. And as I said before, there's no return type. I mean, nothing's going to be returned in this. And you can see the naming convention taking place right here. The P, which is the first letter of the first word, is lowercase, and the all right. Okay. And then the string is capitalized. The first letter of string is capitalized. All right. And then, so what this does is that the name print string is sort of the reusable container that you probably saw in the previous slide. And then system.out.println A, and then whatever else is in the method is going to be called the code. So basically, every time you ask the compiler to execute print string, the compiler is just going to run the code inside of the main method. All right. And this right here, print string with parentheses and then a semicolon after it, is called calling the method. It's called calling the function, and you'll learn a little bit more about that in the next slide. Yeah. So as I said before, this statement is called calling the method. And for calling the method, every time you call the method, it would go inside of the main method. And you can also use this code as many times in your program as you want, and it'll always run the code inside of the method, however many times you called it. So at the moment, you guys might not see, wait, hold on, is it not working? Okay. So right now, it might be faster to just write, instead of writing this huge complicated method stuff and then writing code inside of it and then calling it, you might think it's simpler just to print out system.out.println A. But let's say you had like 20 lines of code in this method. Then you wouldn't want to write out those same 20 lines of code over and over again every time you want to execute a task. But instead, you can only write it out one time and then have it stored in a function, and then only use the name of the function whenever you want to use it. So that's how the function saves space, essentially. Oh yeah, the output's 8, by the way. I don't think I mentioned that. All right. So inside of the method, it can hold any type of code that you want, but as usual, it can't generate any errors or can't generate any exceptions. And it works the exact same as if it were inside of a regular program. And the format for calling a method is the name of the method followed by a set of parentheses. All right, so we write down the name of the method. See, the name of the method is print string. We put that in the main method, and then we put a pair of, what is it called? Parentheses after it, and then we set it as semicolon. Also, notice how we've taught you that every time you write a piece of code, you have to end it with a semicolon. Well, that's true, but not when you're like creating stuff. Like if you're creating a class, you're creating the main method. If you're creating your own methods, you don't need to end it with a semicolon. All right. So another type of method is methods that have parameters. And this Google document will lead you to a bunch of examples, but let's learn about them a little bit first. All right. So as the name suggests, parameter methods are a type of method that accepts parameters. And parameters are data that are needed for a method to work because the method will use those data pieces inside of it. All right, and just like the other method, this method only does things like printing stuff or computing things. And these methods can require any number of parameters, but every time you want to declare a parameter, it has to be separated by a comma. So I think if I click on this, hold on a second. All right, so I'm going to show you what these parameters looks like and the commas, I guess. So is there any way I can zoom in on this? All right, so here's an example of a method. We have public static void print string, just like before. And you see these, string A and string B, these are the parameters of a function or a method. And as you can see, if let's say these didn't exist, right? They're just gone. Then the function would give an error because it needs to use those pieces of data inside of it. And, oh wait, what the? There we go. Sorry about that. Yeah, so these are called parameters. And when you call a function, you have to pass in what we call arguments into these parameters so that the function print string knows what string A and string B are. So that's kind of a quick overview. Let's go back to the lesson now. Present. All right. Also, the methods can have any number of parameters. In the example above, we only saw 2. Oh yeah, I also forgot to point this out, but the parameters always have to be separated by a comma, and same thing applies to the arguments. So you can't just say string A, string B, and then whatever parameters they want. You have to include a comma between each parameter declaration, I guess. All right, so let's go back to the slides. And the parameters don't have to be all of the same data type. So you could have like a string parameter if you wanted to like find out the name of someone. You can maybe have an integer parameter to figure out what's their name. What their age is, etc. But when you call the method, you can't enter more or less parameters than defined when calling the method. So let's say you have a function and you have 3 parameters in it. You can't pass in 2 arguments or 4 arguments, for example, when you call the method in the main method, because I'll give you an error. And the parameters that you enter don't have to have the same name as the ones defined in the method. All right, so that was a brief overview on how the parameter types work. We're going to move on to return types now. Before we move on though, does anyone have any questions about how the parameters or anything else works?
Speak now, because okay, I just have to say that static methods can be extremely hard to understand at first, because like you're not using the main method anymore. Not really, at least. You're like using the other parts outside of the main method. So it can be really hard to understand at first. So please let us know if you have any questions, because this becomes a really important concept. And if you want to go on to Java 3, then you should know this pretty well. Otherwise, it might be difficult. So please let us know right now if you have any questions. Otherwise, it might be difficult later.
Oh yeah, also Renee posted the links to the lesson slides if you guys want to like take a review on it, because like this might be kind of a hard topic to understand. You can go back with it. You can maybe go on even online and find some other resources.
Yeah,
So
and
yeah,
I also have to mention that on the links page, I also put at the very bottom some supplemental video links that you can go to for extra help. Those are from another creator. They explain it differently than I do, and so you might want to go look at that. Also, I do have explanations on the code a bit more in the document, so it would also be good to go look at that when you can.
yeah. So what he's saying is that like, right, saying that if you go here, then like you don't have to have me explain it. If I just do it real quick, Renee wrote a bunch of comments on the site that shows like what this does, what this does, what this does, this, all that good stuff. So this is also a good resource if you guys want to use it. Yeah, let's go back to the lesson now. Okay, hold on. All right. So now we're gonna do a method that have a return type. This is actually the link to the same document that we use for parameter types. So you can see all of the good stuff or all the information on one page. All right. So this type of method returns a value. And this might be a little misleading. It doesn't have to be value. It can be anything, like literally anything. It could even be like an array if you want. But when it returns something, it doesn't print anything out automatically. So I'll show you this in the examples, but the first part of the method is not the same as before. Instead of saying public static void, blah, 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 the void was replaced with a data type, and it can be any data type that you want. And whatever data type this is what your return type is going to be. These types of methods have to have a return type, and you need to put whatever the supposed output's data type is there. And make sure to put the correct return type. So go to the example page. If you look here, instead of writing public static void and then whatever stuff we need, we have public static int. And of course, it doesn't always have to be int. It could be any data type you want. It could be a double, it could be a Boolean, it could even be an array. If it's an array, you can just add a square brackets, but I'll leave it like this for now. And you need to have this return statement. All right, so we're returning an integer. We're writing public static int, which means the return type has to be an integer. And it seems kind of obvious, but the return type also has to be an integer. So be careful when you use variables that you know what those variables are containing. So int return an integer makes sense, I guess. You can also insert parameters like with the other type of method, but you don't have to. And parameters and return types can use any data type, even arrays. So not only can the return types be an array, the parameters can also be arrays. So an example of an array data type would just be int and then a square brackets. So like when you write a method or a function, it doesn't just have to have parameters or just have to have return types. You can have a combination of both, which is actually recommended. So if you want to, I guess. But one limitation for return methods is that you can only have one return statement per method. And you can have one return statement if you have if statements, but in the end, only one return statement is going to be executed. All right. All right. So, I guess I'll just go back to here, I guess. Good. All right, so just like before, we have int, and now we're taking an integer variable called a and an integer variable called b as our parameters, and then inside of the method, we're going to return a plus b. And since a is an integer, b is an integer, the sum of two integers is going to be an integer. So when we return a plus b, we know it's going to be the same data type that we wrote in the method's creation. Also, when you return something, essentially what's happening is that when you execute print int in the main method, whatever this says is going to be like replaced. It's not a good word for it, but it's kind of how it works. It's going to replace print int 59 with whatever you're returning. So in this case, we're going to say, we're going to create an integer variable called a, and then we're going to call the function print int, and then pass in 5 and 9 as the parameters. So int a would equal to 14. All right, because whatever is being returned here becomes the method calling place, the method calling declaration. All right. So now we're gonna have methods with the same name, and you can do it, Renee, I guess.
Okay, so, okay, I can do that as well. Actually, okay, it might be best if you share it still, because I didn't add transitions on the slides, so that's the reason I want like some interactivity, which, yeah, without transitions, it's hard to do that. So yeah, Leo, could you share the slide? So the original slide that you were on. Yes, that one. Okay, so methods with the same name. So it's possible to have methods with the same name. It's just that they have to be either different parameter types, you have to have different total number of parameters, or you have to have a different ordering of parameter types. And I know that sounds like a lot of different things at once, right? Because like, you know, that's a lot of different things that you can do. But like, you kind of have to visualize it, because usually with variables, right? Java does not allow you to have variables with the same name, because Java doesn't know what you're doing, right? So the same kind of concept applies here, except now it's, you can do that. You can have the same name. It's just you have to differentiate in terms of parameters in some way. So for example, you can't have two methods with the same name and the same number of the same types of parameters in ordering in one class. So different return types don't work either. It has to be parameters. And so Leo, don't move on to the next slide yet, because I want to give some examples. So let's see. How does this work? Actually, sorry. Now I think, can you let me share screen? Oh no. Sorry, give me a second. Okay, sorry, my computer's blocking out, which is probably not very good. Anyways, okay, I am gonna share my screen and give some examples, and let's see if you guys know what's happening. So I know that was like all at once, and please don't look ahead to the other slides, because like that would be not adhering to the point of the exercise. But yeah, so if we had this configuration of static methods, right? So we had a static void print string with a string A, and a static void print string B. The question I want to ask you guys is this allowed? Like, will Java allow this to pass without an error? So give me a 1 if you think no, give me a 2 if you think yes, there will be no error. Type in the chat. All right, I see a 2. Anybody else have a guess? No problem. Yeah. Anybody else have any answers? Does anybody think it's okay? So like with the problem on the screen, what do you think like, would Java allow this to run without an error? Like the code on the screen, with the fact that it has the same name of print string. One of them has a parameter of string A and string B. Then will it work? Will Java allow it? Okay, well, without the fact that I didn't put the public class thing, any other reasons why? Like, would this work though, like in a regular setting? Okay, so actually the answer was no, it will not work. Does anybody have a reason why they think that would not be the case? So remember that it's either because number one, like if it doesn't work, it's either because number one, it's the same type of parameter, or it's the same number of parameters, and if it's in the same ordering. So if that's the case, then you would not be able to have the same name, method name. Does that kind of make sense? So the reason why this does not work is because you have, so okay, so if we want to visualize this better, so first, number one condition for if Java is going to give you an error is number one, if you have the same type of parameters. Number two, if you have the same number of parameters. And number three, if you have the same ordering of parameters. So essentially, if all three are true, then Java will give you an error. So does that kind of make more sense, everybody? So like, give me a 5 if it makes sense. Give me a 1 if it does not make sense still. Okay, no problem. Everybody else, does this kind of list kind of make sense? So if you have the same data type, so like if both are strings, for example, in this example, if there's the same number, so like if you have 2 parameters and the other one also has 2 parameters, and they're both the same data type, that doesn't work. And if the same ordering of parameters, which means if you have a string int and then another string int for a parameter, then it doesn't work. There's an example later on with that as well. Okay, anybody else want to say how they feel? I know it's difficult and we kind of sped through it a bit, but let us know how we can help. Okay, there's another example. And I will copy and paste that one over. Again, please don't look ahead at the other slides. Okay, here you go. So this is the other example. So looking at this, right? So we have print string still is the same method name. Now we have a string A and then an int B now. So my question to you is this going to work? Is Java going to give you an error? So give me a true if it's going to give us an error. Give me a false if it's not going to give us an error. Take a guess. It's fine if you're guessing. All right, I see a false, a true. I'm not sure, Kevin, what you mean by a 1. Okay. Well, actually, Tony, it's actually either true or false, so it's not exactly 1 or 2. But it's fine. Okay. Well, I would have to say that, yeah, okay. 2 of you got it correct. So there's actually no error. The reason why is because, first of all, like if we look at all of these conditions, right? Number 1, if you have the same data type of parameters, in this case, you don't, right? So you have one string parameter, and then you also have one integer variable. But that's not the same data type, right? Like, because it's not the same, then we automatically fail the number 1 case. And therefore, what that means is that Java will not give you an error because Java says that if all 3 conditions are true, then it will give you an error. But we already failed the first condition, right? So that means this does work, we're fine. Okay, because of the fact that we have different parameters. Okay. Let me know if that makes sense. There's another example. Mhm. And I'm gonna copy and paste it over as well. Okay, this one. So now again, we still have the same print string, right? We have an int A and an int B. The difference here is that the return types are different. So one over here is void, right? The other one over here is an int. So one of them is saying with a void that we're not returning anything at all. The other one with an int return type, we're saying we're going to return an integer for this method. So my question to you guys is, will this output without an error? So give me a true if you think it's going to have no error. Give me a false if you think it's going to have an error. Switching it up on you guys. All right. I can't tell if you sent that to me without, okay. Okay, I have one answer so far. Anybody else want to take a guess? Okay, I have one person saying error, one person saying no error.
This might help you guys a little bit, but when you tell Renee if you think it's going to give an error or not, maybe you could give her a reason to see if you can maybe correct.
That would also be good. Yeah, like
so you can give you feedback and tell you if it's right or wrong.
Yeah, so if you're saying an error, actually, if you're saying there's no error, what condition does it fail? Okay, we can do that for the next one, but for the sake of time, I'm just gonna go over it. So I see two people saying error, one person saying no error. And the answer is that there is gonna be an error. The reason why is because of the fact, okay, let's go through the conditions, right? So first we're saying if you have the same data type of parameters. So yes, you do have the same data type of parameters, right? You have an integer parameter here in the first one, and you have another integer parameter in the second one. Okay, so that is true for this one. Okay. For number two, you're saying if you have the same number of parameters. In this case, yes, you do have the same number of parameters, right? Because I see one parameter here, and then I see one parameter here. So same number equals true. Lastly, we have this one, right? If you have the same ordering of parameters. So this one, again, more applies for if you have more than one parameter. But in this case, since we just have one, then it's in the same ordering, right? Like it's integer and then another integer. So therefore, this one's also true. So in this case, because all three of these conditions are true, like it says here, then Java will give you an error. Because there's no way to differentiate between them, right? Like I was saying earlier, even if you have different return types, that does not matter because Java still cannot interpret which method you're trying to call. So for example, if we're saying print, oh no, that's not it. That's not a print string. If you're saying print string 3, right? Well, if we're just looking at this part, right, which one is it trying to call, right? Because this one both has print string and then an integer parameter to put in. This one also has print string with another integer parameter to put in, right? So I don't know what is going to call, right? So that's the main reason kind of thing why we look for that, because when you call a method, the only thing you see is the method name and the parameters, and there's no other way to tell between a method, right? So that's kind of the main reason why we do that. Okay, I'm wondering if there's another example. Okay, there's one last example. Haha. Time to trick you guys. I actually don't know if this one's gonna trick you guys or not. Okay. And lastly, let's look at this one. So give me a true if you think this is gonna run with, okay, just say whether or not it's gonna give you an error or not. is this going to give you an error? True or false, or whatever you want to do. Okay, I see a no error. Anybody else? Jesse's also saying no error. Anybody else have an answer? Okay, thank you. Somebody said it looks pretty nice. Okay. That's a good reason for saying no error, I guess. All right, again, for the sake of time, I'm just gonna move on. But yeah, so 2 people are saying no error, and you would be correct. Because, like we're saying here, right, we have to go through the conditions. So if you have the same data type parameters, in this case, we're kind of only looking at the data type, right, that is within. And we do see an integer and an integer here, and a string here. So that technically does check out. Number 2 is if you have the same number of parameters. And yes, you do, right? Because you have 2 here, you have 2 parameters here, and then another 2 parameters here. Therefore, it checks out because you both have 2 parameters. This is the main one that I was kind of like hinting at earlier, is the fact that now I have 2 different parameters for both, right? But the thing is that they're mixed up, right? Like one of them has the integer first, the other one has the integer later. And the point is that Java can actually tell between these 2, right? Because if you're saying print string 5 and then hello versus print string hello and then 5, Java can tell between them, right? Because it can see that this first one is a string and the last one is an integer. So it's a lot easier to tell between the 2 then, because like then I know which one it is, right? Because of the fact that the ordering is different. So therefore this one, last one, becomes false, and therefore Java will not give you an error. All right, that was the last example. Is this starting to make a bit more sense? So give me a true if you think it makes more sense. Give me a false if you think it doesn't make more sense. And Leo, you can probably continue sharing.
All right. Yeah, so this is the example that Renee just went over with. And you can actually find these 4 examples in the lesson slide. So you have this one, and you have a good one, and a bad one, and another good one. And you guys can look at that, you know, maybe try to do a little bit of review if you want. But yeah, so that was everything on static methods. Now we're going to work on static variables. We're going to learn some stuff about that. And essentially what static variables are is that they're variables that are visible to the whole entire class and the methods in it. And public, as you can see right here, means that it can be used anywhere in the class. And here's an example of a screen static variable. If you guys remember, I think we talked about scope in Java 1, but scope is, did we? Yes.
There's not really an official lesson on it, but I'm planning on adding it. So, but
Oh,
it
okay.
doesn't really matter.
All right, so let's not talk about that now. It just says, okay, public means you can use anywhere in the class. And let's say you have multiple Java files in a single folder. Public also makes this variable visible to programs in a completely different file. So that's, you know, it's kind of interesting, I guess. And the int can be changed to another data type. It could be a double, Boolean, whatever. And this variable is placed outside of the main method, but it's still inside the public class. And it is used just like a regular variable. So the int sum equals 5 here is what we're, you know, normally used to, I guess. But then the other is that we add public static behind it. They say that, oh, it's a static variable, and public saying that, oh, it can be used in the entire class. And here's an example. So the example is all the way at the bottom. It's gonna, all right, so for now, we don't need to worry about all these change, counter, fancy stuff like this. But here is the example of creating a static variable. So public static as usual, and then we're going to create adult is going to be a double variable. I'm going to call it counter, and it's going to equal 0.0. And even though it's outside of the main method, we still need to add a semicolon after its creation. And notice how the main method comprises of all of this code. You put it outside of the main method. I'm just going to add an enter just to make it a little more readable, I guess. And Renee, do you think we should go over this, how all this works, or should we just go straight to the class problems?
Depends on you. I mean, I think I have like comments there anyways that you guys can look over on as well. So that's there. Maybe we can do a poll. Do you guys want to do you guys want us to go over this problem and how it works? Or do you want to do some class problems?
By the way, that was the end of the lesson. Oh yeah, before you guys go, there's a new exception that we're learning today, okay? This exception is called the illegal argument exception, and an exception is just an error exception that occurs when a method or a function has been passed with the invalid parameters, such as wrong data types, or too many or too little parameters, etc. And just like with all the other exceptions, you can test the exception and try and catch blocks to see if your code has an error in it, and you can also throw it to see what the error message would look like. And that should be the end? Okay, yes. Does anyone want to go over this or not?
The general thing for that, I think, because I created it, the main thing is that if you see there's no lines, dang it. If you see in the main method, the second line with like the change counter, new int, brackets, square brackets, that's essentially how you do a shorthand way of creating an array. So like you can literally just say new int, square brackets, and then have curly brackets and put every single value that you want to have in your array. So that's something I wanted to point out just so that you guys know that that exists, because otherwise, I don't know, sometimes you might find it really annoying to have to continuously write whatever. Yeah. Like the thing that Leo's writing on the screen, it might be tedious to continuously write that. So just letting you guys know that there's a shorthand way of doing it. Besides that, the rest of the code is kind of just signifying how you can essentially change the variable anywhere inside of the public class. So essentially what it was displaying is that in the change counter, you are able to, like change counter method, you're able to change the counter variable to whatever you want it to be. And you're also able to change the value of the counter variable inside of the main method. So that was essentially what the example was supposed to illustrate. Brief synopsis. Anyways, since I kind of already went over that, then I think class problems. I think we have time to do like 1 or 2 main ones, and then we can just go over that together.